Back in the old radio days, we used to play a specific piece of music every Friday.
Yeah.
Remember those days?
Yeah. Apparently we were on the air a few years.
Yeah. We don't play that music anymore.
No, we play new music.
It would cost us.
We can't afford that.
We can't afford any of that crap anymore. But it is Friday, and it's Bob McCown and the Bob McCown podcast featuring John Shannon.
Oh.
And today, well, when I say this, I seem to say this all the time. We're going to talk to a couple of pals. Both of them have been on this podcast, I'm pretty sure. I know both of them were on the radio program on a regular basis.
Yes.
Matt Sekeres is the co-host of Sekeres and Price, a successful podcast venture. After he got bounced from radio in Vancouver, they went on and launched that and have done very well with it. And Bruce Garriock is the fine scribbler for the Host Media organization out of Ottawa.
And he's on TSN's Senators broadcast as well.
There you go. So I don't have to tell you how the Vancouver Canucks and the Ottawa Senators have been doing in the early part of the NHL season, but we're going to talk about it from coast to coast almost. Garriock and Sekeres when we come back after these messages. It's McCown. It's Shannon back with you. Well, we thought we'd give you a good news day to end the week.
Oh, yeah. Right. So we'll talk about a COVID team and a team that's on a state of depression.
Combined, the two teams we're going to discuss have 9 wins, 20 losses, and 3 overtime losses. That ain't too good. And I guess it depends on where you are as to how far off expectation they are. But Matt Sekeres of the podcast Sekeres and Price is in Vancouver, and our pal Bruce Garriock of Post Media is in Ottawa to discuss those two respective franchises. And Shannon, I will let you kick this off.
Well, the fascination for me about what's gone on in Vancouver and Ottawa is that Vancouver actually has a better record than Ottawa, and people in Vancouver are in much greater panic mode. Do you think that's fair, Matt?
Oh, absolutely, John. Like, this was supposed to be the year after a long decade here of finishing in the bottom third of the NHL with competitiveness. Like, everybody here liked the offseason that general manager Jim Benning and the Vancouver Canucks had. They, of course, have these terrific young players who we all thought would blossom and break out here as they get into their age 22, 23 seasons and things like that. And it has been an absolute tire fire here through 17 games. They've lost 5 in a row. They've been blown out in 3 of those. They haven't been very entertaining, and they are tracking towards a historically bad penalty kill. Guys, they would need to kill 57 straight penalties to get to 80% PK rate, which is about league average. So it just goes to show, and their power play hasn't been all that good either, despite all the offensive talent. So just about everything that could go wrong has gone wrong here in Vancouver, and that I submit as my case for the worst team in Canada now.
For the
nation's capital.
For the record, we don't have anybody from Montreal on the podcast.
That's right.
That's true.
Yeah.
So, and Bruce, before we talk about the team, you better give us a COVID update.
Well, looks like the Senators will hit the ice Saturday. They'll have 8 players out of protocol. The only guys who I think won't be out of protocol are Nikita Zaitsev and Drake Batherson. It was chaotic what was happening around here. And I know that they approached the National Hockey League, John, on the Wednesday before they played the Los Angeles Kings on the Thursday night and pleaded for them to just give them 5 days off. Just let's shut us down for the weekend and see what can happen here, see if we can stop the spread. And then for their own, how do I put this? For their own peace of mind, guys, they were doing their own antigen testing on top of the PCR testing. So they were in fact testing the players 2 and 3 times a day. And that's what was causing the chaos, was they were getting back false positives, or that eventually did turn into positives, but then they do a PCR test that came back negative. I mean, it just became out of control here. I think the best thing that has happened is they have shut them down for 5 days. They've had 5 straight days of all negative, so they will skate Saturday and Sunday here in Ottawa, and then play the Colorado on Monday night.
And just to clarify, they didn't shut down for the LA or the Calgary game, probably because they're Western Conference teams.
I think that was probably what went into this was, they somehow got a win against Pittsburgh Penguins. That was a miracle in itself, but really Ottawa wanted them to shut down LA, Pittsburgh, and Calgary last weekend, and the league just would have none of it. And when it got to the point of 10 players, I don't think the league was left with much choice.
Just for clarity, not to dwell on this too much, but what kind of condition have these guys been in, the guys who tested positive? Mild symptoms?
Yeah, most of them have lost the sense of taste and smell. I think some of them would tell you, Bob, that they're a little stuffed up. I mean, they are all fully vaccinated. I think that associate coach Jack Capuano probably had a little more because of his age. He's 55 years old. And but I think for the most part, they're in pretty good shape.
So, go ahead, John, you were going to say?
Well, just Matt, the issue in Vancouver this year hasn't been COVID. And you talked about, Jim Benning did have a good summer. Jim, and all of a sudden everybody's calling for Jim Benning's head. And what do you think? He had a press conference yesterday. Did that stop the bleeding? Did that quell the desire for his dismissal?
Well, at least it showed some accountability, at least, and he took responsibility. And so, at least this sort of vacuum of leadership that we were watching transpire ceased. And for one moment, or for half an hour, one day, he stepped up there and took all the slings and arrows from Vancouver media, stemming from this fan base who did chant "Fire Benning" and even chanted "Sell the team" to the ownership group during Wednesday's home loss to Colorado. The problem, John, is that Jim Benning doesn't have any answers here, and there's very little outside of making a big trade. And I'll defer to Bruce on the big trades. That's his shtick. But there's not a lot of trade activity going on right now. There are very few teams that are out of it. There are very few trades you can make right now that bring in a player that are going to change matters. So to a degree, he threw his hands up and said, "Look, like, our young players have to start playing better." Elias Pettersson has been awful this year. I mean, I think he's on pace for like a 40-some point season. Brock Besser was their best player last year. He's gone absolutely silent through big stretches this year. Bo Horvat as well. Really, he has no other choice but to think the answer is there with the group that they have right now. The other thing that's going on here is that the head coach and the coaching staff doesn't appear to be jiving with the players. Pettersson sort of gently, softly criticized the power play structure a week and a half ago. Jason Dickinson gently, softly criticized the penalty kill structure. And Benning mentioned that yesterday as well, that there were systems issues that they were working on in practice. So, this is game 17, fellas. These are the sorts of things you would hope through a training camp and preseason would get straight. They haven't, and they're costing the Canucks in a significant way.
And Matt, I'm not one of the hosts of this show, but I would ask you, don't you think that one of the people that people in Vancouver really wanted to hear from yesterday was the owner? How much would the owner coming out and saying something help this situation? Because he put out that letter on Twitter the other night that was widely panned, and I'm not sure him doing a press conference would help, but I think he could quell the waters a little bit.
Yeah, well, he put out a letter last year when they were in the midst of a long losing streak, basically standing by his man and saying, I still believe in Jim Benning and Travis Green. I don't necessarily look. I think there's a lot of media that want to hear from Francesco Aquilini, who identify him as the problem here. Like, when you take a look at the number of executives who have left this franchise, and many of them have left this franchise because they say, look, we just, autonomy is a fleeting commodity in Canuck sports and entertainment. At some point, the Aquilini family gets up in your business and you spend too much time managing up and dealing with a high maintenance ownership group. So I do think there were some who would have wanted to hear from the owner, but the owner's public appearances here, Bruce, and you might be able to relate, have not always gone swimmingly with the public. And
Well, I was
from
going to
that
say,
standpoint, there's a chance he could have done more damage.
yeah, Gary, that's a little like the pot calling the kettle there from Ottawa.
Hold on now.
Usually from you media guys in Ottawa, in order to get information from your owner, you have to watch our podcast.
I love your podcast. Hey, I don't mind.
That's where your owner makes more appearances than anywhere else.
Bob, as a
I don't
former
mind
sports
him going-
business reporter in Ottawa, that is absolutely true, my man. Absolutely true.
I have no issues with him going on your podcast. You will never, ever hear me complain. You might hear some other whiners in this marketplace, but it will not be me.
That's very nice of you to share, Bruce.
That's the funniest thing we've ever had on the podcast right there. That's it.
Let's talk about
Gary Ock has a timeshare in Barbados. Huh?
well, let's talk about expectations here. I'm just going to throw my 2 cents in. You guys know I'm full of crap most of the time when I talk about hockey, but I got to tell you, Sekeres, I wasn't a believer in the Vancouver Canucks. I thought the optimism that market had for that franchise was colossally overrated.
Yep.
I'm not from Missouri. I'm from Ohio, but you still got to show me, and they have shown me nothing.
Correct.
And did they make enough significant changes in order to make me change my opinion? They did not. Yeah. On the other hand, Gary Ock, I thought there was a chance that what we saw late last season from the Ottawa Senators might morph into something positive. I'm not going to sit here and say they were going to be a playoff team and certainly not a Stanley Cup contender, but there was some reason for optimism at the end of last season, and that hasn't materialized into anything so far this year. So, Bruce, to you first, explain.
Well, they haven't picked up where they left off, and I think one of their biggest issues, guys, has been on defense. And they brought in Michael Del Zotto, and he has not lived up to their expectations. You say, well, what did he expect? I'm not sure what they expected, but clearly they're not getting what they expected. Mm-hmm. And I look at the other part of this, guys, and I say the situation with the Senators right now is haven't been able to keep Matt Murray healthy. That the thinking was that he would come back strong. Their best goaltender has been Philip Gustafson. And the other thing is, quite frankly, the young players have struggled. Josh Norris has not been in the last 5 or 6 games what they expected. On most teams, an injury to a 21-year-old rookie named Shane Pinto wouldn't hurt them. It's hurt their depth in the middle. And they need to, I think they need to do a few things, not the least of which is make a trade. And I'm sure that he's offered all the help he can get to Jim Benning in Vancouver if he'd like to do something.
Hey, let me ask you this, because Bob's point's a really interesting one. We spent last season, the 56-game season, for the first 10 games, loving the Canadian division, the last 46 lamenting the Canadian division because we saw everybody too much. But did it create a level of fool's gold, do you think, even for the Canucks who were in COVID protocol for so long?
Well, I can't see how last year could have created any kind of fool's gold for the Vancouver Canucks. They finished the worst team in the Canadian division. I mean, early in the season, they were throttling the Ottawa Senators as everybody was. And we were sitting there going, oh my God, Ottawa's so bad. Maybe that's a 10-12 win team. By the end of the year, the Senators were clearly better than what the Canucks were putting on the ice, albeit without Elias Pettersson. The fool's gold, if there was any, John, and this question was asked by my colleague, Jeff Patterson, to Jim Benning yesterday, was that bubble performance a couple of years ago. They beat Minnesota in the play-in round. They dispatched the St. Louis Blues, the defending Stanley Cup champions, and made it look pretty easy too. And then they took the Vegas Golden Knights to 7 games and were, one shot away from the Western Conference Finals. So I think management and ownership bought into that team a little, despite the fact that after that season, management or ownership turned off the taps. And so they lost players like Jacob Markstrom and Chris Tanev to free agency, and they're still reeling from that. I mean, I see Bruce's concern about the Ottawa Senators blue line, and I raise them the blue line here in Vancouver. And here's the thing, it's actually been okay this year, despite the fact that you would look at it and go, that's not nearly good enough. on paper. So yeah, they finished 17th in the overall league standings that year, John, the COVID shortened year, the first one. They were tracking towards falling out of a playoff spot when the pandemic hit. They got into the dance by virtue of the expanded postseason and the play-in round. They looked awfully good when it would appear that their team and their players, that bubble playoff round in Edmonton, mattered more to them than it did to other teams. And they built off that, thinking onwards and upwards. Hasn't been the case.
What about Fool's Gold in Ottawa, Bruce?
Well, I think that if you look at the way they played down the stretch, they had struggled so much during the season. It finally seemed like they got their game together. And now you look back on that, the way they went 9-2-1 down the end of the season, and you wonder, well, was it? But I really felt like what we saw at the end of last year was the young players get mature. I think what we need to see now is we need to see consistency from guys like Tim Stützle. And, you know, he scored 1 goal in 15 games. Sure, he's had a lot of chances, but he's got 1 goal in 15 games. They need more than that from him. You know, Josh Norris hasn't scored in 6 or 7. Drake Batherson has been by far their best player. I wonder if he's put himself on the radar screen for the Olympic team. And Brady Tkachuk, there needs to be more consistency there as well. So they're relying on young players. Nikita Zaitsev struggles on the back end have really hurt them. And at times they just have not gotten the goaltending they needed.
It's interesting to think that the 3 last holdouts of restricted free agents were Hughes and Pettersson and Tkachuk. And both teams are struggling.
And you
wonder if that, Hamada, you wonder if that's a coincidence or something else.
Yeah, Pettersson and Hughes got here with 1 week left in training camp and preseason. I believe they played a couple of preseason games, but in Pettersson's case, Johnny missed 30 plus games with a wrist injury to end last year. He hadn't played since March. So yeah, I think some of that was to be expected. I must say Hughes looked pretty good right out of the gate. So I'm not sure he has that crutch to lean on. You know, like the other thing that we're sitting here wondering with Pettersson in Vancouver, is he overcoached? Is the coaching staff in his head? Is he not playing naturally? He's not playing freely. I mean, he's one of these creative, imaginative players. You know, Bruce, frankly, to some degree, sometimes he reminds me of Daniel Alfredsson back in the day when, you know, the puck is on his stick and everything slows down, and he's a creator in the half court. He's not the fleetest player, and this league gets faster and faster every year. So there's some concerns right there this year about his foot speed, about whether he's not able to keep up. And he's also not the stoutest player. And, you know, for a while there, we thought, okay, well, he'll get by in the National Hockey League a little bit like Patrick Kane does. You know, no one's ever going to get a square hit on him. He's, you know, it's kind of slippery like that. And he doesn't need to rely on his strength. But you watch the number of times that he has just been muscled off the puck this year, and you wonder if there's a strength issue on top of a speed issue, on top of, you know, a coaching staff in his head where he is erring on the defensive side of the puck, and it's really got him a little bamboozled about what to do on the offensive end.
What do you think about Brady, Bruce?
Well, I just think that you know, he came in late. I think one of the things that he has taken to heart is that he's just trying to maybe do a little too much. You know, look, Brady Tkachuk is always going to be the guy who leads you into battle. He's always going to be the guy who is going to drop the gloves for a teammate or do whatever is necessary. But I think he's just got to be a little more consistent in scoring goals and bringing the offense to the table. You know, people made a lot of the fact that Pierre Dorion stated during training camp that the rebuild is over. And I think that got misconstrued a little bit in that the days of sending players packing are over. The pieces are in place. Look, this team is going to be built around Tkachuk, Norris, Stützle. Down the road, a guy like Jake Sanderson, Thomas Chabot, who's playing a lot on defense. And I think what they've said to Brady is, okay, we're going to bestow the C on you, and you lead the way. But I think in some small way, shape, or form, that has caused him to have some pressure that maybe he didn't see before.
So was there a need to do the C when they did?
I think so. I think it was time. You know, they'd gone since 2018 without a captain. It felt to me like they were delaying the inevitable. They probably even could have done it the night that they signed him, and people would have been happy. No, I think the timing was right for that to happen, and it allows it. Look, I think we know they're probably not going to be a playoff team this year, but it allows him to get comfortable in the role, because next year they absolutely have to compete for a playoff spot.
Well, explain this to me, Hockey Pucks. So you got guys on your team that wear an A. You got a guy on your team that wears a C. How come nobody wears a B? Why is there discrimination against the letter B in hockey? Can someone explain that to me, please?
It's
because I don't get it.
There's no such thing as the B team.
Hey, this is
yes, there is, and you cover one, and so does the Terrace.
But you know, that speech we could have just taken, unplugged all the names of Ottawa players about, hey, this is the young core. We could have unplugged that and put that in Vancouver. We could have. It's the same speech. And the interesting thing is that both teams have what I would describe as interesting owners. Where's Eugene right now, and how patient is Eugene in all this, Bruce?
Well, I think that obviously this COVID-19 has caused, I don't know how to put this. COVID-19 has just put everything in, those last 10 days, it's almost like they're willing to say that really didn't happen because they don't know what it would have looked like. It started rating their talent. Obviously, as you know, I communicate with Eugene, and I obviously would like the team to be better. I don't think there's any question about it. I think he expected this team to be better, and I think, and I think that I think the players and the management themselves expect them to be better. And obviously he'd like to see improvement, but as much as people think he's hands-on, I do believe that he's hands-off, and that he lets them run the team, and he lets them make the decisions. And obviously, would he like to be better? Of course he would.
But you think Eugene over this tenure is going to be patient?
Well, I think he's willing to be patient this year, because I think he looked at this as a year to take a step in the right direction. They've got to come back though from this unplanned break, and John, they've got to start. I don't know, making hay isn't the right word, but they've got to start getting this thing pointed in the right direction. That's not going to be easy. They got 4 games in 6 days, all out of their time zone.
And so, Matt, that leads the question on the other side. Where's the patience going to come with Francesco Aquilini and his family?
Yeah, it's a little bit different here in Vancouver when it comes to patience. This is the 8th year for this general manager. This is the 5th year for this head coach. In fact, there was a meeting called earlier this week where Jim Benning had to report to the chairman, Francesco Aquilini's office, that I'm told he wasn't sure he was going to emerge from that offense still as general manager of the Vancouver Canucks, or thought he might be on his way to a coaching search because of some necessity for change. Look, they've lost 5 in a row, guys. They are 6 back of a playoff spot with 6 teams to jump. Chicago didn't get a regulation win in their first, now 11 games, I think it was. The Blackhawks have passed the Canucks in the league standings. And here's the thing, the Pacific Division is better than we thought it would be. I mean, Calgary's been phenomenal this year. Anaheim's been excellent. The Kings have been excellent. So suddenly you're in a bigger boy division, which may not be as gettable as you once thought. It's getting to the crisis point in Vancouver whereby if you still think this season is salvageable, there better be some wins as early as this weekend, or we may be looking at a scenario where there's a head coach or a GM search going on next week.
We got to take a break. We'll come back with more. Stick around. Back after this. McCowan and Shannon with Matt Sekeres, who I assume is the host of the Sekeres and Price podcast. He got top billing, and it wasn't alphabetical either. So
at least Price got billing.
Well, touche, I guess.
We introduce you as the co-host of the McCowan podcast every Monday.
Yes, you do an outstanding
titular.
You do an outstanding job. You do an outstanding
job. All
with that.
Right. The two of you can get a room. Bruce Garriaca Post Media is with us as well. attendance is always an issue in both markets. These are two NHL markets that are very sensitive to the performance of the clubs on the ice. So let's go one at a time here. What's been happening in the building the last little while? I know Vancouver had a road run there, but what's the attendance doing, Matty?
Well, first of all, I think there are, strikingly different contrasts to the markets and the attendance questions. Now, I grew up in Canada, Ontario. I'm quite happy where the rink is for the Ottawa Senators. It was always a short commute for me going to games there, but this is a downtown arena here in Vancouver. Rogers Arena is right there. It's right on the SkyTrain line. It is really accessible. Tickets are a little expensive, but of course, this is a pretty moneyed market. Haven't sold out a game yet. We're close for the home opener. And, now you're really going to start to see it, I suspect. And that's going to be one of the drivers for ownership, is that they can't sell these single game tickets, that the walk-ups are going to be tough because of the performance of the team. Now, the building looked really empty on Wednesday, Bob, but a lot of that had to do with the flooding that we're having out here in British Columbia. Communities like Abbotsford and Chilliwack and some others right now are sort of cut off from the lower mainland and downtown Vancouver. So, that's going to have an effect as well. But yeah, smattering of boos. They're getting restless. They're getting hostile here in Vancouver. And this is a market that has proved time and time again that, if you don't put a good product on the ice, they will vote with their wallets.
Garriock in Ottawa.
Well, as you know, Bob, I mean, the Senators are trying to regain the trust of the community and the business community. And that has been since Anthony LeBlanc was brought in over 18 months ago, his biggest job. And obviously they still have a low season ticket base. They've got to get that season ticket base up. I think they had some difficulty selling season tickets because of the pandemic and because of they were the last team in Canada to get clearance to have a full building. They've had a couple of crowds of 14,000 plus, but there have been some nights in there of 8,000. And that's why this team has got to get back to being competitive. And you know what? The one thing I always say is their attendance started to go down as soon as they made the bid for LeBreton Flats. And that was whether people like it or not, that was the first time, Matt, publicly, and you grew up in Ottawa, so you know this. That was the first time publicly they told people their arena was too far. Yeah. And since then, their attendance has gone down because they almost said to people, you know what, we know it's a long drive. Mm-hmm. And people always say, well, the location of the arena is an old story. It's Matt, it's still about location.
Doesn't winning solve everything, Bruce?
Oh, I think it would. I think absolutely. That look, we know winning solves everything because we saw it through the course of their trip to the Stanley Cup final in those years from 2000 to 2007 when they were a very competitive team. But I do say that you have to look at that whole LeBreton bid and it falling through, and you can just watch the numbers go down as soon as they started bidding for LeBreton. Because then people said, well, let's wait till they're downtown.
Yeah. And is there any discussion? Do you hear any murmurs?
Eugene was on your podcast and said those were the only murmurs I've heard lately. And he had everybody in Gatineau fired up that they might get the home team.
Oh, Bob, have you heard any murmurs?
No, you know what? There has been some discussion about perhaps a site just off the Queensway near where the old baseball stadium is. There's some land there. It's the old RCMP headquarters. It's off Alta Vista Drive. There's been some discussion that Eugene has looked there, but I don't know. I think what they have to do is just focus for the next 5 years, because even if they got a new rink, it would be 5 years. Just focus the next 5 years on getting people back to going Canada. And I do think next year they will have a competitive team, and that will get people back in the mode as well.
One of the points of difference that is clear here, if you paid attention to these two franchises or just listened to what we talked about for the first, 20, 25 minutes of this thing is in Ottawa, there's no conversation that I'm aware of fire the coach, get rid of the general manager.
No, not at all. No, in fact,
in Vancouver, that's about all that anybody's talking about, right? I mean, that's a pretty dynamic difference. Sekeres, thoughts?
Well, I just think it's different points in their evolution, Bob. Like I heard Pierre Dorion earlier in the year say, hey, this is the fun part now. This is where we can start being more competitive and start winning more hockey games. And you look at the youth of that club and where it has come from. And yeah, that's understandable. In Vancouver, there were expectations. There were absolutely expectations. You know, like we were hearing about, this is the best top 9 in the Western Conference forward group. I mean, the young goaltender, Thatcher Demko, has really stepped up and become an absolute pillar of the organization. They're not great on defense, but boy, is Quinn Hughes a marvelous young talent to watch on a night-to-night basis. And, you know, they even kept this head coach around, and he was a young first-time head coach, Travis Green, to grow with this group. So, you know, that's why you're seeing all the hostility here, is that there were for the, you know, and, you know, each and every year there are some expectations. More often than not, it's a little bit too lofty, a little bit too delusional, you know, because fans, you know, want to believe that their team is good. But, you know, this year, I think it was a little more pronounced and it was a little bit more credible. And this team has completely underachieved through 17 games. And, you know, they haven't even been entertaining. Like the one thing we thought in preseason was, you know what, they may lose a lot of 5-4 games this year, but you know what, they're going to give us 2.5 hours of entertainment on a lot of nights. And not even that has shone through all that much.
That I tell you what, that's the Senators quote too, because the Senators even last year, Bruce, right? They were at least fun to watch. Yeah, they were a bunch of kids that having a good time.
Yeah, and the issue is I think the difference between Ottawa and Vancouver is Ottawa hasn't overpromised and underdelivered. There was just a lot of people thought there was a lot of promise the way they finished last year. Mm-hmm. Have they underdelivered? Sure, they have, because they should be better than where they are right now with a 4-9-1 record, I think it is. But they didn't have the expectations that the Canucks have on them.
But tell you what, Matt, let me just ask you one question. After the trade with Arizona and after Hughes and Pettersson finally got signed, wouldn't people have said Jim Benning had a good summer?
They did. Everybody here. I mean, it was 80-90%. If you had asked Canucks fans, did Benning have a good summer? Yes. And like, this has been one of the troubles with this general manager, is he is often overpaid in free agency, you know, selected the wrong players. They've had a pro scouting problem here during his tenure. But no, you're quite right. They added Connor Garland and Oliver Ekman-Larsson and Jason Dickinson and subtracted nothing from their hockey club. I mean, they Louis Eriksson, Antoine Roussel, and Jay Beagle were not playing for this team, or playing, you know, very small roles. They were on bloated contracts. So getting those 3 players out to Arizona to bring in Ekman-Larsson and Garland, despite the fact that it cost first and second round picks as well, was viewed as quite a coup from Jim Benning. He got rid of bad contracts and got guys who could play. He took advantage of Dallas and their expansion draft situation to get Dickinson in, who has been an absolute, I mean, he's been a nothing for them. He can't win a faceoff. He can't kill a penalty. He doesn't score. So he's been a total flop thus far. And, you know, here's the other thing, guys, like this group, owner, GM, and coach, have been so embattled that they are this deep in their tenure and every egg is in the basket of making the playoffs. Yeah. And so there are many here in Vancouver who look around and go, wait a second, Jim Benning, this is your 8th year. Travis Green, this is your 5th year. Francesco Aquilini, we started rebuilding, you know, a couple of years after the Stanley Cup final appearance in 2011. How are we not more aspirational? You know, like, how are we not at a contender status now, let alone just trying to make the playoffs? So it has been a long road to here with expectations, at least formally articulated by the hockey club, that don't seem to match the journey. Like, we should be further ahead watching this hockey club than we are right now.
And I think that's where Ottawa, Matt, is that they're not at the place where the Canucks are yet. And you know, the coach signed a contract extension because Brady Tkachuk wanted to know who his coach was going to be for the next 3 or 4 years. I'm not saying that's why they signed him, but they wanted to show that they were going to have stability within their organization. They signed the general manager to a contract extension because, say what you want about the record, he did a good job in getting assets for the players he moved out, and the assets are there. They're on the ice. Is it? They've got to put better veterans around them, but these are two organizations that really aren't in the same place. But maybe Ottawa's at the way you speak, Matt, is maybe Ottawa's at a tipping point now heading into next year, in that they have to do what the Canucks haven't been able to do for 8 years, and get themselves competitive.
So let me ask you this: we joked off the top that Ottawa and Vancouver probably aren't the worst team in Canada. Who truly is the worst between the three teams, Montreal, Ottawa, and the Canucks?
Mm-hmm. Well,
Matt?
Well, I suppose my vote would go to Ottawa if Montreal was dealing with a healthy and in the lineup Carey Price. Like, to me, the things that happened to the Montreal Canadiens this offseason, which were completely unexpected, have derailed them here in the early going. And, Carey Price himself is a game changer. So it's a little bit, it's a little bit of an apples to oranges conversation. Like, I think Vancouver has a lot more talent than what they've shown. Like, I'm not necessarily sure, guys, that they're a contender, that they're close to the Alberta teams or anything like that. But I think when they're playing their best, despite depth issues, they should be a team that's competitive for a playoff spot in the Western Conference. I'm not quite sure Ottawa is there. I would put them sort of a tier or a half tier below.
Well,
Bruce?
Garriock is smiling like a Cheshire cat.
Yeah.
Why?
Because I'm going to put on the Homer cap.
Yeah.
Of course you are.
And my only point to that would be, Ottawa is drafted and developed. Their assets are going to come into play. If Montreal had Carey Price, there's no question they'd be a better team. And some things have happened to Montreal, but look at Montreal; they're a mess. Their general manager is basically a lame duck. They haven't really drafted and developed very well. You look at the team that Pierre Dorion and DJ Smith have on the ice. That's a team they want. They want to add more to it, but a lot of those guys are drafted and developed by this organization. You can't say the same for Montreal right now. And they hooked on a hot goaltender and they got to stand to the final, but the Eastern final. But geez, I think Ottawa's in the long haul going to be a better team.
What's interesting to me? I mean, I sit and listen to these kinds of conversations, hockey conversations, and almost invariably, when you talk about a team that's not playing well or slumping or whatever, the finger almost invariably is pointed at goaltending.
Mm-hmm.
If your goaltending isn't good enough, you can't win, no matter what kind of a team you've got. Now, goaltending has been mentioned here by you two guys, but you haven't pointed at goaltending in any way, shape, or form as the cause, or at least part of the reason why the two teams are struggling. Let's get specific. What's the goaltending been like in Vancouver this year?
Pretty good, Bob. Pretty good. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean,
I'd shudder to think where they'd be without him.
yeah, no, it's
Well,
fair.
they gave up 14 goals in back-to-back games, didn't they? 7 and 7.
No, they did. No, the goaltending the last week hasn't been as good, but through the bulk of the season, it's actually been pretty decent here. Like, Thatcher Demko is a terrific young goaltender. There are nights where he stands on his head.
I understand
this team in the game, and Yaroslav Halak is the perfect veteran backup goaltender. They don't have a win for him yet, but he's been pretty good in his starts as well. So no, John is absolutely right. Like, where the Canucks would be without goaltending is a terrifying thought.
What about Ottawa?
Well,
Yeah.
I think that they probably haven't gotten the goaltending they needed. I mean, look, 7 of their 9 points have come from Phil Gustafsson. That means that Matt Murray and Anton Forsberg have really struggled. And as I said to you guys earlier, they need to play better defensively in front of them to at least give them the opportunity to make the saves. And I think I would hazard to say that their goaltending has been inconsistent. But Gustafsson has been. I hate pointing that finger at Gustafsson because he's been, to me, he's an AHL. He was an AHL goalie. He's brought up to be the third goalie, and he's been their best goalie.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess what's that say about their goaltending?
Well, I actually, in both scenarios, and Matt touched on it in Vancouver. The blue line has been sporadic at best. I mean, Tyler Myers has had a tough season already.
Same here,
tough
John.
Season. And so it's funny. I would tell you that Matt Murray, this is my personal opinion, Matt Murray cannot play behind a non-structured blue line, and Thatcher Demko can. And I think Philip Gustafson, if you can play in the American League where you have no structure at all most of the time, you can adapt to no structure when you get to the NHL. Matt Murray has a tough time when he doesn't know where the shot's coming from. And when you have trouble on your blue line, Bruce, you're going to see that, don't you think? Well,
exactly. And beyond the pairing of Thomas Chabot and Artem Zub, who's been a nice surprise for this team, the other four defensemen, whoever they have been on a nightly basis, have struggled mightily. And I know I keep bringing up his name, but the biggest shock to them is Nikita Zaitsev, because Zaitsev, quite frankly, and anyone can argue with me, has been their best their most consistent defenseman, along with Chabot, behind Chabot for the last 3 years. He hasn't been this year.
Yeah. And it in Vancouver, it's a shame on the blue line, because it really has reflected in Ekman Larsson's ability to be effective for the Canucks, right?
Yeah. John, it's been a really puzzling case study, the Vancouver Canucks blue line, because look, Quinn Hughes is a marvelous offensive talent, skater, puck carrier, and all that. Now, he's not exactly your shutdown defensive defenseman type. They bring in Oliver Ekman-Larsson, who, if I'm not mistaken, led the NHL, was worse than the NHL last year in turnovers in his own zone. They brought him in to help, on the offensive side and munch minutes on the blue line. He hasn't really helped on the offensive side, but maybe has been better defensively than we thought. And then, depth is a real issue for this team on the blue line. They are consistently playing an AHL pair on their third pair. So they're leaning on the top four. And, in some cases, Tyler Myers can't handle the load. Tucker Pullman can't handle the load. Overall, team defense has been better this year for the Vancouver Canucks at even strength. This has been an issue in years past where they just get bombarded, outshot, outchanced. That hasn't been as much the case this year. But again, it's been that penalty kill, which is historically bad. I mean, like just over 60% right now. So it's almost a coin flip each and every time you take a penalty. And, more recently they have taken more penalties. So, one of the nicknames that Tyler Myers has gained here in this market is Tyler Miners. So that's where we're at here. Particularly, and when we were leaning on four defensemen, and, a couple of them are taking the number of penalties that they take, like suddenly now that AHL pair is out there killing penalties, and that's been part of the problem.
How much of a distraction has the Travis Hamonic saga been?
I'm not sure you can blame too much on the saga. I mean, I think, in the early going, they could have used them, although that's when they were winning some of their games. And, honestly, John, a really disappointing admission from Jim Benning yesterday. This had been a franchise that had been really, really strong and part of the solution here in British Columbia in terms of encouraging people to get vaccinated and drawing a hard line on COVID-19, everyone from the owner on down. They lost 3 games. They invited Travis Hamonic back. He wasn't double vaxxed. We came to find out yesterday, Jim Benning told us, that Hamonic, in fact, had reservations about getting his second vaccination. They played him anyways, even after saying we don't want anybody who isn't double vaxxed in the building. And he only got his second vaccination a couple of days ago. So he missed the last U.S. road trip, couldn't play there. And he's going to miss the next U.S. road trip, is not going to be able to play there because the quarantine laws on the way back. It certainly hasn't helped, but it's not high atop the list of things to blame here.
Only a couple of minutes left. I want to touch on something a little bit outside the box while we have you guys here. Hockey people, sports people in general, always like to pick a team at the beginning of the year that they think will win the championship. And I'm not going to ask you to go back and divulge who you selected, but have you seen a team that you didn't really think of at the beginning of the year that now you think, well, I should have taken a shot at them? Is there somebody that's really been a surprise to each of you? Is there one team jumps out?
Calgary Flames.
Yeah.
Yeah. In like in a minute. And not that I think, not that I would have ever picked them to win the Stanley Cup, but to me, that change behind the bench has had a way better effect, Matt, than I ever thought it would. And to me, in any conference, they're the biggest surprise.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Daryl Sutter has come through Vancouver, I don't know how many times over the course of his career with LA and Calgary and whatnot. You know, one of the things that we hear often from his mouth is it's a 3-2 league. It's a 3-2 league. You've got to be able to win games 3-2. Of course, he does it with his signature Daryl Sutter way. You got to be able to win games 3-2. You got to play good team defense. The goaltender had a rough start last year in Calgary, Jacob Markstrom, but we certainly know what he's capable of in this market. He's been splendid this year. Look at their road record, fellas. Look what they're doing when they get away from Southern Alberta and the Saddle Dome. It's an amazing performance away from home. And, you know, the other thing is year to year, I always say Calgary, when I think they're good, they're bad. When I think they're bad, they're good. And so, you know, it fits neatly into that narrative. I'll give you a second team, Bob, just because Bruce took mine, but I've seen the Anaheim Ducks a couple of times.
Yeah.
10-5-3. And boy, are their young players growing up. I mean, Troy Terry has been an absolute revelation this season. But if you watch Jamie Drysdale handle the puck and you take a look at some of these other young players that they have in their lineup, the Anaheim Ducks, who needless to say have had a tumultuous season off the ice with Bob Murray, they look to me like they're ahead of the curve. They look to me like they're going to be a contender in the Pacific Division. Maybe not a cup contender just yet, but certainly a team to be reckoned with this year and beyond.
Well, you know, there's surprise in Vancouver and maybe a little bit less so in Ottawa, two franchises that are not off to a quick start, but you should have expected all this. There is clearly a relationship between the performance of the CFL teams in both cities and the performance of the hockey teams. The BC Lions are crap.
The knife, Bob.
Ottawa's a pile of dung too. On the football field. So there you go. Next time, next year, when you're anticipating what will happen with the hockey team, just see how your CFL team is doing. No,
that's as close as we're getting to talk about the CFL on this podcast in a long time. So
yeah, and don't hold your breath on the next time we talk about it either.
Can you guys just give me a heads up when you're getting Eugene on again?
Yeah,
I know I know the
radio.
I know the radio stations in Ottawa love it.
Yeah.
Well, I tell you what, I'll put a good word in with the producer. So,
Bob, I'm duly charmed that you wore your Vancouver 2010 Olympic pullover today. In my honor, I remember great times here with you that February. I'll leave you guys with this on the Canucks. We've had a big weather event here this week, high winds, flooding and whatnot. At one point, an empty barge, typically carrying wood chips, broke free. It started drifting aimlessly in English Bay here and eventually beached itself at Sunset Beach, where the people stopped by, gawked at what was a terrible sight. Here's the other thing about it. Nobody has taken ownership of this barge. We're not sure who it belongs to. It stands as the perfect metaphor for the Vancouver Canucks this week.
Oh.
Very good.
Wow. Well done. You wish you were writing still.
Yeah, exactly, Bruce. You're going to get that lead in the sun.
Boys, we know we love you. We thank you very much for coming on with us, spending a few minutes. We wish you continued success in your respective careers and the things that you're doing. And we look forward to having the opportunity to chat again soon. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Bruce.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks, John.
Well, thank you, John.
We'll take the break. We'll come back after this. Well, as always, as we return, we thank Matt Sekeres and Bruce Garriock for being with us. And
so we talked about
chuckles.
We talked about the worst teams in Canada: Montreal, Ottawa, Vancouver. Who do you think the best team in Canada is right now, Bob?
Pretty good question. I guess you got to go Ottawa.
Ottawa.
Calgary, Edmonton, Toronto.
Well, and how can you not pick Winnipeg in that list too? I mean, they beat Edmonton at home and then lost in a shootout in Edmonton on Thursday night.
Well, are you just being diplomatic by throwing Winnipeg in there, or do you actually think Winnipeg should be in that conversation based on how they've played overall so far this year?
I think they have to be in the conversation.
All right.
I really do. I mean, it's fascinating that what we've seen is a real division between 4 teams in Canada that
Well, it's
are
haves and have-nots right now.
at this point. Yeah, that's exactly right. And I mean, McDavid.
Like if you had a Canadian division, John, if we had the Canadian division,
what an idea!
4 teams would have clinched already.
Maybe you're right.
17 games in, and they're almost a lock to be the top 4.
It's funny. Winnipeg and Edmonton played a back-to-back, and both games were very good. This is following that 4-game sweep by the Jets in the spring, and there was a playoff atmosphere in Edmonton on Thursday night for that game that went to the shootout. The sad thing is now, because of the schedule being reverted, they only play once more this year. And it's one of those ones where you say, Winnipeg and Edmonton, they don't play in the same division. So the league actually gave them a bonus game in January, but you'd like to see them play more than 2 or 3 times a year because the hockey is so good right now. And it's a great rivalry.
Well, you hated the Canadian division when they played 52 times.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I did.
Now you're bitching the other way.
I know that.
Make up your mind, for God's sakes.
Why? I'm a typical hockey fan. I love my general manager one week and I want to fire him the next.
Are you surprised that nobody's gotten fired in Vancouver yet?
No, I'm not. I think that there's enough people in the organization high up that understand that it's just a little too early right now. It really is a little too early. A lot of it's on the players, Bob, and that's what Matt kind of tell you. A lot of it's on Pettersson and Horvat and Besser and Hughes and a lot of those guys.
Well, and to point that out, 12 games ago, we were talking about, everybody was talking about what are the Toronto Maple Leafs going to do, and is the president going to get fired, the coach or the general manager, what's going to happen? And now they're red hot, and that's completely off.
Counselor, I rest my case.
Well said. That'll do it for us for today and for the week. If the creek don't rise, we'll come back on Monday with something new for you. For John Shannon, Bob McCown. See ya.